we've been working on some stories by Beatrix Potter, who is a really famous author from a long, long time ago. And now her stories are free on the internet for anyone to read. And together we read the story, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, a little while ago. And then we read The Tailor of Gloucester, which was a couple weeks ago is when we finished it. Today we're going to start working on a new story by Beatrix Potter. And this story is called The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. This story is a sequel to The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And what it is in the story Peter Rabbit went to the farm to find some snacks, and he had to run away from the farmer, who was named Mr. McGregor. And when he was running away, he lost his clothes, he lost his shoes, he lost everything. And so in this new story, we get to meet his cousin, and his cousin helps him try to find some of his clothes that he lost in that first story. Now, before we learned the story, The Tailor of Gloucester, which was pretty tricky. But if you remember, The Tale of Peter Rabbit was a little bit easier. And this story, The Tale of Benjamin Bunny, is more similar to The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So if you thought Tailor of Gloucester was too difficult, that's okay. We're going to go back to a little bit easier, not very easy, but a little bit easier with the style of The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So let's get into it and let's take a look. Let's take a look at The Tale of Benjamin Bunny. Benjamin Bunny being Peter Rabbit's cousin. And so let's go through it just from the start. The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter, author of The Tale of Peter Rabbit. She wrote other stories in the middle, but this is the first sequel to Peter Rabbit. And it's copyright 1904. So when the book first came out, it was in 1904. So it's pretty old. The story is an old story, but it's a really good story. And I will tell you if any of the language is a little bit old-fashioned. And we can talk about more modern ways to say something. Okay? So here's a picture of Peter Rabbit's mother, and I think that's Peter Rabbit's siblings. What was it? Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, I think? Okay, so let's get down here and zoom in a little bit. We can get a little closer. Oop, too close. I think this is good. Okay. That's good. That's good enough. Okay. Let's see. Maybe a little bit over. There we go. Okay. Canis says, "Good morning, Kyle." Good morning, Canis. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining. I hope you like this story today. So, let's get started with Benjamin Bunny. Cute little guy. Look at him with his jacket and his shoes. Oh my gosh. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. Now, like I said, this is easier, but it's still a little bit tricky because the story uses some old-fashioned words. But don't worry, I'll help you through it, and there are some words that we can just Google it if we get a little bit stuck. So let's start at the beginning. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. Now, you probably know the word bank, but does it look like he's on a bank here? Well, if you think a bank is a place for money, you're right. But bank has another meaning. A bank can be the side of something. So you can see the ground next to Benjamin goes down a little bit. I'll use blue so you can see better. You can see it goes down a little bit. And so a bank is a place where the ground goes down. Usually it's on the side of a river. So if there's a river, there will be land next to it that goes down a little bit. That's called a riverbank. Maybe you've heard that before. You can imagine the ground goes down a little bit as it goes to the river. That's called a riverbank. So you can see that he's on some sort of land that's going down a little bit. Okay? Well, I'll keep my crappy drawing. How about that? And then we'll say riverbank. Okay. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. So he pricked his ears. This is something that animals can do. People can't really do it. But what it means is point their ears in a direction. So like to prick your ears up is to like lift up your ears and listen carefully. Okay? So he pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot. Now this is just a sound. You can hear it. Trit-trot of a pony. Well, a pony is like a horse but smaller. So what sound does a pony make when it's walking? Trit-trot, trit-trot. So that's just what it is. That's the sound of the pony walking by. A gig was coming along the road. Now, what is that? It was driven by Mr. McGregor. Okay. So this gig is a tricky word, but it's driven by Mr. McGregor. So can you imagine what it might be? If he's driving the gig, it's something that has wheels. But there's also a pony. So there's a pony and it's driven by Mr. McGregor. What could it be? Well, it's kind of like a carriage. A gig is a kind of carriage, which is like a little bit like a car that's pulled by a pony. Let's see if we can get Google. So a gig, oops, I don't want that. Go to Google, gig, carriage. And you can see, just look at the images. A gig is a little carriage that's pulled by a horse. And what's special about a gig is it only has 2 wheels. Okay? You don't need to know that for the story, but you can imagine, okay, it's there's a pony, he's driving it, so it's something that's pulled by a horse, like this. Okay. So it was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. Now, she's in her best bonnet. So you can imagine that she's probably wearing this thing. So she's wearing a bonnet. Maybe you don't know what a bonnet is. A bonnet looks like this. Maybe not all of these, but a bonnet is a kind of hat. So like this. Oh, I don't want to go to Amazon. This kind of old style hat from like 100 years ago. Or this one, this lady over here. Maybe not great now, but a long time ago people wore bonnets. Okay. So Benjamin hears Mr. McGregor and Mrs. McGregor go by in their gig, which is their carriage. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off, with a hop, skip, and a jump, to call upon his relations, who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. So, as soon as they had passed, so Mr. McGregor and Mrs. McGregor went by, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off. He set off. What is he doing in the picture? Well, he's running. So to set off means to go, go, go. You start to move really quickly. He set off with a hop, a skip, and a jump. So these are all kinds of jumps. So a hop is a small jump, a skip is like with one foot, and a jump is a real jump. And we often use this phrase with a hop, skip, and a jump. This is a pretty common phrase just meaning going quickly, or maybe when someone does something and they're excited or they're happy. Like if a student is happy to go to school, maybe you could say, he walked to school with a hop, skip, and a jump. And if you say that, you know he's excited. Okay? So, Benjamin Bunny set off to call upon his relations who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. Now, relations is the same as relatives. Now, relations is the same meaning, but it's kind of an old-fashioned way to say your relatives. And relatives means like your extended family. So people who are related to you. Not your mom and dad, brother and sister, but your aunts and uncles and cousins. Those are all your relatives. Okay? And a long time ago, instead of saying relatives, people would say your relations. So, Benjamin Bunny set off to call upon his relations. So he's going to talk to his relatives. He's going to talk to his cousin's family. Okay? And because Peter Rabbit's family lives next to Mr. McGregor's garden. So, that wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Let's go piece by piece. So that wood was full of rabbit holes. We learned in Peter Rabbit that the word wood means forest. Or it could be like a small forest. Just imagine there are many trees around. So that wood was full of rabbit holes. And in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins. So that just means their home is really neat and sandy. Neat means clean. Sandy just means it's made of sand, or there's lots of sand around. And these are the names of the cousins. And of course, we remember Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffatees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Okay, so old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. Now, this is not a happy word, but it's a word you should probably learn. A widow is a woman whose husband passed away, or her husband died. So, Mrs. Rabbit is alone. She doesn't have a husband because in the first story, we heard that Mr. McGregor ate her husband. So the farmer cooked Mr. Rabbit in a pie. I think that's what happened. So not a very happy thing to happen. So Mrs. Rabbit was a widow, meaning her husband passed away. He died. So she earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. Give me a second. Okay. Just wanted to double check before I show you. So she knits things. To knit means to use two metal sticks to make clothing. Okay? So using, here's a thread, some wool and some thread on the floor. And she uses that to knit things. She knits mittens. A mitten is a kind of glove. A glove goes on your hand, but a mitten covers all of your fingers. So let's look at a mitten. Mittens look like this. Usually this kind. They cover all of your fingers. Now, the other word is a muffetee, which is not a common thing, but again, you can Google it. So a muffetee is this kind of, a little bit like a glove, but with no fingers. So this word is not common, so don't worry about that. But you should know the word mitten. A lot of people wear mittens in the wintertime. And then the author says, I once bought a pair at a bazaar. A bazaar is like a market. It's kind of like a market, just with many shops selling different stuff. Okay? She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Rabbit tobacco is not a real thing, okay? So no one says rabbit tobacco, that's just from this story. But tobacco is something. Tobacco is what is inside of cigarettes. So if someone smokes cigarettes, they are smoking tobacco. But in this story, it's not a regular cigarette, it's rabbit tobacco. But they call it rabbit tobacco, but we call that lavender. Lavender is a purple flower that smells really, really nice. So lavender looks like this. So in this story, it's pretty cute. Some of these rabbits smoke. I mean, that's not very good. You shouldn't smoke. But they don't smoke cigarettes, they smoke lavender. That's kind of cool. It must smell kind of nice. And they call it rabbit tobacco. So that's kind of fun. So Mrs. Rabbit sells some things, and she sells rabbit tobacco, which is just lavender. Okay. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. So, little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. This is kind of an old-fashioned way of saying this. You can tell that this part, the verb, is a little bit mixed up, right? In modern English, or American English, I would say he didn't really want to. So I'll add the want to. So he didn't really want to see his aunt. So it's the same thing, but just instead of saying really, the author wrote very much. He did not very much want to see his aunt. Little Benjamin didn't really want to see his aunt. Why? Well, he's a kid. Maybe he thinks his aunt will make him clean the house or something like that. Okay. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. So their house is under a fir tree. A fir is a type of tree that just looks like this, like a evergreen tree, like with needles. Okay? And he nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. Tumble is kind of like fall down, but like all over, boom, boom, boom. Okay? Fall down, but a little bit like rolling. Fall and roll. Ayo. I can't type today. Oh, also, I just said ayo. Now that I'm in the United States, sometimes I'll say things like ayo, and people think I'm crazy. But oops, I guess I spent a lot of time in Taiwan. So he came around the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. He almost fell on top of Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. So, does Peter look very good? No. Here's, I love those shoes. Benjamin almost fell on Peter because Peter's like kind of hiding in this hole. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly. Again, this is an old-fashioned way of writing or talking. I would just say he looked bad, or he looked bad, or he looked unhappy, or he looked unwell. That's probably better. We don't know if he's unhappy, but he looks unwell. He looks not good, right? And he was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. Now, this looks like hand-ker-chief, but we say it faster, like handkerchief. Excuse me. I've been talking too much today. Sounds like handkerchief. So, you can see from the picture, Peter is wrapped in a red handkerchief. But what is a handkerchief? A handkerchief is a piece of cloth that people don't usually carry these anymore. Usually we just use tissues, like paper tissues. But a handkerchief would be to wipe your nose or to sneeze achoo, into. So a handkerchief looks a little bit like this. It's a piece of fabric. It's usually a square. In a suit, you might put a handkerchief in the pocket. It looks a little bit like that. And someone might sneeze into a handkerchief. Okay? Okay. So Peter is wrapped in a handkerchief because he doesn't have any clothes. So here's Benjamin talking to poor Peter. Peter, said little Benjamin in a whisper, who has got your clothes? Peter replied, the scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden, and described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her best bonnet. Let me drink some water. So, Benjamin wants to help Peter, and he says, Peter, said little Benjamin in a whisper, Peter, who has got your clothes? So, who has got your clothes? This has got is very common in England, but in America, we usually would just say who has, who took your clothes. Who has your clothes or who took your clothes? I'll read it up here. Or we maybe just where are your clothes? But yeah, who's got your clothes? Where are your clothes? These two words together, has got, is a little more British. Sometimes you hear it in America, but it's more common in England. I have a question from Canis. Do people still use handkerchiefs for coughs in the US? No, not really. People don't usually carry a handkerchief. It's not common. Usually people just use tissues. You might have a box of tissues in your house, or some people might carry a couple tissues in their pocket, like paper tissues. But people don't usually carry a handkerchief. It's not common. The paper tissues have taken over. But good question. So, Benjamin whispered, who has got your clothes? Peter replied, the scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden. Do you remember a scarecrow is a fake person that stands in a garden and scares the birds so the birds don't eat the vegetables. So the scarecrow is wearing Peter's clothes. And then described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. So he had been chased about the garden. In American English, we would say chased around the garden. So you could use the word about to mean around. So that's a little bit tricky. He had been chased about the garden. He had been chased around the garden. Do you remember in the story, he was running away from Mr. McGregor? And during that, he had dropped his shoes and coat. Okay? Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig. So he sat down and assured him. To assure someone means to tell them, and it means to tell them, but also to tell them when you are sure. You know for sure. He's definitely out. So, it's kind of like to make someone feel better. You tell them, oh yeah, don't worry about it. I know for sure. That's to assure someone. kind of a tricky word to use, but it's kind of common. Someone assured someone else that blah, 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 blah. I assure you that it will be a lovely day tomorrow. You should go to the beach. So, little Benjamin assured Peter that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig. So Mr. McGregor is gone for the day. He's not coming back, so you can go to the farm. And Mrs. McGregor also. So both of them are away from the farm. And certainly for the day. So certainly is the same as definitely. Like he's sure, he knows definitely that they're going for the day, meaning the whole day. So they're not coming back until the evening, probably. So they're going for the day, for the whole day. How does he know? Because she was wearing her best bonnet. Could someone have a best bonnet? Remember, the bonnet is that kind of hat that women used to wear. A bonnet looks... No, not that. A bonnet looks like this. She's wearing her best bonnet. Oh, it must be so beautiful. So she's wearing her best bonnet, so he knows, oh, they're going out into the town for the day. So that means we can go to their house and take your clothes back. Okay? So, let's see. Okay, let's do one more part and then we can stop for today. We can read through what we read already, and then next time we can continue the story. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. So, at first, Peter said he hoped that it would rain. Why would he hope that? Well, maybe he doesn't want to go. Oh, I hope it rains so I don't have to go. I'll just stay at home. But then, at this point is the same as at that time, okay? Or at that moment. Oh my gosh, I can't type today. I'm sorry. So Peter says, oh, I hope it would rain. And then at that moment, at that time, he hears his mother's voice. Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Chamomile is a plant that people use for tea. So let's look that up. Chamomile. Chamomile is this little flower that people use for tea. And I don't remember the Chinese name for this flower, but it's a really common tea that people like to have. And it's usually a tea that you drink before you go to bed. It helps people relax and go to sleep. So maybe Peter knows that this is nap time, and the mother might call him to go take a nap. And so, I don't want to stay home. And so Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. So Peter said, oh, I hope it'll rain, because he wants to stay home. Mother is saying, oh, maybe it's time to go to sleep. And now Peter says, oh, actually, I might feel better if I go for a walk. So Peter changed his mind and says, okay, Benjamin, I will go with you on this little adventure to the farm. So I think we can stop here for today. I'll put a line to mark where we are. Next time we can see Benjamin and Peter go to the scarecrow and try to get Peter's clothes back from Mr. McGregor's farm. But for today, let's go back to the beginning and we can try reading through what we already read about cute little Benjamin Bunny. And this will help practice what we learned already. So let's go to the beginning, just for make it sound better. The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor. And beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off with a hop, skip, and a jump to call upon his relatives who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who has got your clothes?" Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. And that's where we can stop for today. Peter and Benjamin are going to go on a little adventure to Mr. McGregor's farm. And last time Peter went to the farm, it was not an easy trip, right? He got chased around by Mr. McGregor. This time, the farmer is not there, so maybe it'll be safer. Maybe they'll have a more fun time. Or do you think anything will happen to them when they're there? We'll have to find out next time. So let's stop here for today. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something new. And next time we can get together and read a little bit more about Peter Rabbit and his cousin Benjamin Bunny. So have a good day today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.